Now, Commissioner is here for presenting the proposed package of reforms to the EU's electricity market design. The proposed reform foresees revisions to several pieces of legislation, notably the electricity regulation, the electricity directive, ACER regulation, and the REMIT regulation. You know that we had an efficient, well-integrated electricity market for over 20 years, but we are living now in a more challenging environment. Of course, the most challenging is what followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which sparkled an energy crisis in Europe. We also had the situation of high prices even before the invasion, but also influenced by the game of Gazprom before February last year invasion, which increased the electricity prices. And despite the very good measures taken at the EU level and national level, which calmed a lot, and now we have a better situation than some months ago, we still need to prepare for the future. And one of these key preparation is the revision of the electricity market design. That's why it's extremely interesting for our committee, extremely important. We are also committed to go very fast as possible, but to work as a priority dossier. Tomorrow morning we will allocate to a political group. It will be an auction between the political groups to see who will pay the most number of points in order to take as a rapporteurship, as a political responsibility, together with critical raw materials and net zero, because this came also together with other measures. That's why I will stop here, and I will kindly ask Commissioner to have the initial presentation, and then of course we'll have the dialogue with colleagues. Commissioner, I mentioned that we'll have a dialogue with the Minister immediately after, but I didn't mention that the Minister is already here in the room with us. Thank you for being with us, because he's also extremely interested to see how European Union will reform its electricity market, extremely relevant also for Ukraine. Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christian. Honourable members of the ITRE committee, it's a pleasure to be back in the committee and this time discuss with you the reform of the electricity market design. And this is possibly the last big legislative initiative in the field of energy still in this mandate. So I am truly grateful if you will consider this as a priority so that we can conclude all the necessary procedures before our mandate expires. And as Chairperson already mentioned, we are in this situation where electricity prices are significantly lower than they were in previous year when they hit record highs. But it is important to note at the same time that the prices still remain 2 times higher than the pre-crisis level. Retail prices are also very slowly decreasing, but they also remain 50% higher than pre-crisis level. And the burden on the consumers is too high and calls for a strong policy response. And already at the start of the crisis, we provided member states with a toolbox to design measures to cushion the impact of high prices on vulnerable consumers. And then in September last year, we took extraordinary time-limited measures to intervene in the electricity market. And these measures were twofold: reducing electricity consumption during peak hours and introducing a temporary cap on the revenue of inframarginal producers with a view to using the surplus profits in the electricity market to fund programs that helped to reduce the final bills for consumers. And we also allowed for below-cost regulated prices for households and SMEs under certain conditions. And these interventions were useful and they were implemented by all the member states. But they have certain limits. Mainly, they are very costly for national budgets. And depending on how these measures are implemented at national level, they can also lead to some fragmentation of the single market. And they are, of course, temporary. So it is now time to move towards more structural solutions. Our REPowerEU plan, focusing on energy savings, diversification of energy supplies, and accelerated rollout of renewable energy, remains crucial but we must complement it with market reform measures. There is a second reason why we need to have a targeted reform. The energy market is evolving fast, and the electricity market design should evolve too. Renewables will represent 69% of electricity production by 2030, and new flexibility technologies will be necessary, and active consumers and renewable communities will play a greater role. Technological innovation and digitalization are opening new unprecedented opportunities, and for over 2 decades, the current electricity market design has served European companies and consumers well. It has provided the benefits of a single integrated market, but the energy crisis spurred by Russia's attack on Ukraine made visible some shortcomings in the system. And first and foremost, the current framework focuses too much on short-term markets, because the final electricity price is dictated by the cost of marginal generation, very often gas-fired power plants. The dominance of a short-term market has amplified the effects of the gas price surge, and according to our data, natural gas was the most significant price setter for electricity in 2022. And as a result, consumers have been exposed to high and volatile wholesale prices and have not been able to benefit from the growing share of low-cost renewables. And at the same time, the current market system does not set the right incentives to drive the decarbonization of our electricity system. By 2030, we need 592 gigawatts of solar PV capacity and 510 gigawatts of wind capacity to achieve mentioned target 69% share of renewable electricity. And this requires average annual addition of 48 gigawatts of solar PVs and 36 gigawatts of wind. But volatile prices and short-term market revenues will not deliver the investment acceleration needed for our decarbonization goals, and the incentives for investing in new flexibility technologies like storage or batteries are also today not sufficient. And that's why we want a structural change in the way the power markets work. Our proposal to reform the electricity market design aims at limiting the consumer's exposure to fossil fuel prices, bringing to them the benefits of lower cost renewables and addressing affordability, but also decarbonization and security of supply goals. So, dear members of the European Parliament, our goal is to make the energy bills for the European consumers and companies more independent from the short-term market price of electricity, and we will address this through a set of measures. First, improving the way the long-term market works by boosting the market of power purchase agreements, removing the barriers that hinder their development, particularly for SMEs. Also by requiring the use of two-way contracts for difference, for new investments in clean power generation where public funding is needed, and by improving the forward electricity market so that they become more liquid and better integrated. And second, we want to accelerate the deployment of renewables and the phase out of gas. And this means accelerating the rollout of multi-country offshore renewables projects in the different European sea basins by securing market access for offshore renewable energy production, sustaining investment in new low-carbon generation, and adding measures to facilitate and incentivize fossil-free flexibility solutions that will help integrate the intermittent renewables while directly substituting gas. And the reform will also improve consumer protection and further empowerment the consumers. And above all, they will be provided a choice between contract types and the possibility to use different pricing for their electric vehicles, heat pumps, or domestic consumption. And we are also proposing protection for suppliers' defaults through hedging obligations and from forced disconnections. And finally, the proposed changes will increase market transparency, monitoring capacities of member states, and ensure more effective investigation and enforcement from ACER to protect against market manipulation. And this is the essence of our proposed reform after the disruptions due to the COVID pandemic and Russian aggression. It serves to stabilize the markets, reduce consumer prices, and improve the investment climate. And it is not a crisis measure, but I do believe that people expect us to move on with it without any delays. And we have had some very good examples of timely actions in cooperation with this committee. We can do it again, I truly believe so. And I look forward to listening to your views and very much hope that we will manage a swift legislative process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Commissioner. We go to the dialogue now, to the first round of interventions, questions, assessments, and is a round of the political group coordinators or representatives of the political groups. And I start, of course, with EPP and with Mrs. Carvalho.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Simpson, to be here with us to explain this very important file. As an initial reaction to the proposals that you have put forward, we feel quite satisfied what we have seen with the extent of amendments to the different pieces of legislation. The proposals touch upon important elements that probably are going to work to improve them, such as the incentives to use more longer-term measures, the PPAs and the CFDs, for the provision of energy without touching the short-term markets, which have worked well after the initial shock of prices. Second, the accent on the need to increase the influence of demand response mechanisms, the flexibility, the storage, and in the dispatching of electricity. Third, the decision not to pursuing the emergency measures that were installed in the previous months, with particular reference to the revenue cap, which led to a patchwork of measures implemented nationally. There are certainly other positive sides of the proposal, but I would like to ask if you could explain us a bit better 3 points. One, if and with which measures the proposals address the needs to improve the framework of rules to incentivize more invest in the grids. How can we have more investments in grid capacity, expansion and digitalization of the grid, and as we need to be sure that our infrastructure is fit for the challenge to an increased distribution of electricity across Europe. And as you know, there are several critical points that still need more investment, such as the Iberian Peninsula. Second point that I would like to ask you, how do you see the virtual hubs, how they will be designed, and how they will address the liquidity challenge that is problematic to control and not always easy to determine if a market is liquid enough and for how long. The third, if you could clarify how the two-way CFDs will work in terms of harmonized at the European Union level. Given that they are currently used in some of the member states, they must be compatible with the state aid rules, which apply differently at the moment across Europe, and that they should be compatible with the short-term and forward markets and not distort the competition. So thank you for these 3 points of clarification.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Carvalho, Mr. Nica, please.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a joy to be with you today. Madam Commissioner, first of all, thank you very much, and I'm very happy that you came with this new proposition from the Commission. This is for a new design of the electricity market, and I've been asking for it for years. And many people were staring at me. They didn't know what I mean when I said that it's a market failure, a typical case of market failure. When I went to school, I learned that a market failure is when the forces of the market no longer function And we see interruption in supply with electricity or with gas. And when prices fluctuate so much, well, that's a problem. I don't know if you remember, gas was 3,000 euros at some point. When bakers started going bankrupt because they couldn't pay their electricity bills, when SMEs started going bankrupt, many steelworks companies lost capacity last year. Same for the aluminum industry, same for the chemical industry. In the chemical fertilizers industry, cement industry, and these are just a few examples. We all know them. These were industries that were directly impacted by a non-functional energy market. And you know what upset us more? When we saw the profits that were reported by the big distributors in oil, in gas, in electricity, hundreds of billions in profits. And I said then that it's not fair for these huge profits to exist for some people because somebody paid for that. And the cost was hundreds of thousands of jobs lost. The competitiveness of the European industry was also affected, and it still pains us to this day. And given the war against Ukraine, that created huge vulnerability for us in Europe. It's great that you came with this, that you finally came with this proposal, because we want a system that's clear, that's predictable. We want safety mechanisms when prices spike. We want measures in order to counter that. For the industry, for the people working in the energy sector, we want to offer them a clear, predictable system that companies can have and citizens can have a predictability of invoices. So for that, I am extremely happy, because now we have the chance to show that we've learned our lesson, we know what we have to do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nica. On behalf of Renew, Mr. Morten Petersen, Vice Chair of the Committee.
Thanks so much, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for all your hard work also on this important file. I think it's important that we have a sincere discussion among us on which problem is it that we are trying to solve with this proposal. I think there are issues or questions that we need to solve, and there's also questions that we might not need to solve in this particular exercise. So I think the entire balance between short-term and long-term measures, between emergency measures and between long-term structural considerations are really important for us to address. Some issues will be, so something is nice to have, something is need to have, and this we have to get clear, because in a lot of ways the merit order system has served us quite well in terms of integrating renewables, and clearly we need to do this much more in the future. We need to ramp up the deployment of renewables, and our energy systems obviously have to cater to this. So this is really important to get right. At the same time, I think with the proposal we need to ensure stability and predictability for the investors out there. We have investors all over Europe wanting to deploy billions of euros in the much needed ramp up of renewables. How do we ensure this predictability and stability for these people out there, given that we are now supposed to negotiate a very, very complicated file over the next at least many months? I had the pleasure of negotiating the last electricity market directive. It took us years. Now we're supposed to do a very important and difficult exercise in a matter of months. So clearly this is a challenge. Now, how do we ensure stability and predictability? That's a general question. What do we do with 2023 and 2024 in this short-term phase while we're negotiating and before this is entering into force? How do we address this ramp-up? And very specifically, I think we're going to have some discussions on the balance between state and markets in this directive in these negotiations. How do we avoid fragmenting the internal market is for us also a key question to address. We're looking very much forward to these negotiations, and I'm happy to hear your further thoughts on this, Commissioner. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Greens, Mr. Dalunde, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Commissioner Simson for attending this session with us. First, let's all remember what is the root cause of the increased prices. Of course, there are some issues with the functioning of our market, but is that really the root cause of the increased prices? No. It's the increased difference between demand and supply of energy because of the war in Ukraine. We are importing less fossil fuels from Russia, which of course decreases the supply, which increases prices. The problem arises when we propose changes in the regulation and the market functioning that dampens the incentives for, or dampens the signals to producers to invest right now, because they are worried, will the market conditions change over the coming years? Let's not make investments right now. Let's see what the future will be of the market. So at a time where we need to invest as much as we can, as rapid as we can, this discussion actually decreases the willingness to invest in the short term. And I wonder what your perspective is on this. First question. Second question is, how much of our energy market should be driven by market dynamics and how much should be driven by politics? I welcome that the Commission does not make any big changes in the day-ahead market and intraday, but rather focuses on the long-term market. And that, of course, has a role to play. But when you discuss with experts, ITRE, for example, they don't necessarily say that having a larger share of the market driven by CFDs and PPEs, that will not necessarily decrease prices. It can even lead to increased prices. So I wonder what your perspective is. Is it good or bad if a larger portion of our market is driven by politics rather than by markets? I'm not a market liberal. There are many parts of our society where we need more political influence of the functioning of a society, but I'm not convinced necessarily that the electricity sector is where we need more politics and less market.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On behalf of the ICR group, Mr. Tobisowski, please.
Thank you very much. I will speak Polish. Szanowna
Madam Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your presence, for being here, for being so active. Your participation, your engagement is very valuable. Today, when we discuss the reform of electricity market and following your speeches in European Parliament, I have to say that you keep on repeating that the Commission wants to incentivize the use of renewables. And you said that we need the reform which will allow us to lower the prices and protect consumers, but also increase incentives when it comes to investments in renewables. And I agree with your ideas. However, if you want to provide security, if we want to achieve our environmental goals, then in the EU, based on the documents, we should quadruple the power of wind farms onshore, offshore, and we should increase by 6 times the potential of photovoltaic panels. In order to produce all this, we will need hundreds of tons of materials. And these are not random materials. These are critical raw materials. However, based on the data provided by the European Commission, by 2030, the demand on rare earth metals for wind turbines will increase. Also, when it comes to the demand on lithium, this demand will increase by 11 times. And we will also have a higher demand for other raw materials. When it comes to their localization, where they can be found, we are dealing with countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is only democratic by name. We have China, we have Vietnam, we also have Russia. In recent years, These recent years have also witnessed high prices of rare earth materials. Lithium, for example, and other materials, their prices are on the increase all the time. And I would have a question to you. In what way do we want in the European Union carry out this green transition, having such big problems with access to rare earth materials, and how to make sure that we do not become dependent on countries whose reputation when it comes to democracy is not that excellent? Thank you.
Last intervention, the first round is the intervention of the coordinator of the left, Mr. Botenga.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. You presented your reform of the electricity market. I think many citizens were waiting for this impatiently. We said that the market would guarantee low prices, and they've seen for a year and a half now that actually this guarantee wasn't worth much with the explosion of prices already before the Ukraine war. So you have this reform now, and throughout this period we were told that one of the basic problems was the fact that the price of electricity was linked to the most expensive energy, gas. You said that was a problem. Mrs. von der Leyen said this. You repeated this, that this is a fundamental question. I don't understand. Going through your reform, this basic mechanism is still there. So are you not dodging the key question, which is really the one bothering citizens? And I hear the argument in favor of the market presented by the ecologists, for example, saying that if we cut this mechanism, private companies won't have any motivation in incentive to invest in cheaper renewables. But we put our faith in the market for decades. And actually, our dependence on fossil fuels, whether it was from Russia or elsewhere, hasn't come down enough. We haven't had the private investments in renewables to guarantee this cheaper energy. So my question is, first of all, how can you explain that you're dodging a real reform of this price-fixing mechanism? Why are you leaving it to the market? And secondly, do you think that if we continue down this route, that we will end up having renewables that we need and which citizens have a right to? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Botenga. Madame la Commissaire, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Commissioner, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the first set of questions, and raised many important points, and I tried to address them as much as the time allows. So first, on the scope of the EMD proposal. The reform of the electricity market design is something that comes as one measure in a long list of actions we have taken already over the past year and a half. And it will not be a silver bullet, but something that works together with other proposals, forming a comprehensive solution for the change we need. Last year, we managed this extraordinary energy crisis well, and we put end to our massive dependence on Russia. But we know more is needed if we are to support industrial competitiveness, also transition to green economy and energy sovereignty in the long term. And yes, this is true that last year was extraordinarily difficult for some sectors. Annika put it very clearly, a long list of sectors that suffered, especially here in Europe. But I would add also the traders who were not hedged and failed to secure some of the long-term contracts with fixed prices. So this also created problems across Europe for some of the consumers. And with this market reform, now we try to secure that every consumer will have a provider who is hedged. and by doing so can also honor the contracts that it has signed. The reform of the electricity market design will also be a critical part of our efforts to reach our climate goals. And when we conduct this reform, we must make sure to avoid further disruptions that are so harmful for the perspective of consumers and the power sector also alike. The proposal is carefully crafted, balance of improvements in market functioning and public interventions focused on remaining barriers. We know that we have to give the investment certainty for renewables. We cannot harm the investment environment. And why have we focused specifically on the new investment in clean power production? Because we need a forward-looking solution that will sustain over time, and the contracts to cover existing capacities will clearly not incentivize any new investment, on the contrary. So we need to invest in the future and not lock in the current situation. Mrs. Carvalho asked me to explain how the short-term market that has served so far our security of supply interest, how now we will also address the long-term aspect with our proposal. And consumers, producers and suppliers, they need efficient forward markets to hedge their price exposure and decrease dependence on the short-term prices. So in the public consultation, a large majority of professional respondents, 82%, complained that liquidity in the forward markets is insufficient. And currently the forward markets, they are not offering sufficient liquidity almost all European bidding zones. But in the Nordics, trading has been organized around the notion of a virtual hub for many years. And experience shows that the Nordic virtual hub has been successful in providing more liquidity than what single zone would have had. And the proposal is therefore built both on the Nordic experience and on the answers to the public consultation. And there are many other aspects that we need. Indeed, we need also to incentivize the grid capacity. And this is something that we already addressed with our ETS proposal, but also member states do have additional funds to strengthen their distribution grids, for example, by using recovery funds. And all in all, the broader context of this proposal is that we need a structural improvement which complements our crisis response measures and brings significant added value to our electricity market and building strength on our power system. Morten Pedersen reminded me how much time it demanded when last time we negotiated electricity market design. Then I was negotiating from the council side. And indeed, this is one of the reasons why this time we presented targeted reform, because, well, we do have time constraints and there is no time to waste. Here are some very valuable provisions to protect our consumers, and that makes it also time critical. And once again, there are other parts, other proposals like Net Zero Industry Act, Critical Raw Materials Act that help us to deliver and accelerate green transition. Without these other components, indeed, we might face a situation where one dependency on imported Russian fossil fuels will be replaced with another one. But we don't want to end up in this situation, and that means that we have to also prioritize our own production, domestic production. And I think that the long list of clean tech solutions that were presented in Net Zero Industry Act actually allows each and every member state to find also some of the production where they have competitive advantage and where their specific industry can benefit from our proposal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kadri. We go to the second round, interventions from colleagues, interventions of 1 minute, please. I start with Mr. Ehler.
Thank you. That I in my life would be on the same position than the Greens shows the miracle of politics, but in principle terms, I think we're very sympathetic with your proposal. I have more detailed questions. On the one hand are you aware of the problems of the regional forward market hubs in the Nordic countries? The crucial problem is the lack of infrastructure which prevents the positive effect of such hubs come out. That might be a regional aspect, but it's not addressed. Why are you basically proposing mandatory hedging obligations for energy suppliers? This would have locked in the extreme high prices of the last year for some more time. Will you tackle negative implications such as anticipatory price increases prior to mandatory hedging obligation purchases? How will you address the possible problems of CFDs taking away liquidity from future markets, the exact contrary of the whole exercise? Why is your proposal not touching important issues for the PPA market, such as standardized contracts and financial trading possibilities? And do you see a connection between the flexibility assessment obligation for member states and the work ENSO-E is already doing with their adequate assessment? And last question, why is the Commission now regulating the network codes? Why do you propose to change the closure time of intraday trades to 30 minutes while the practice agreed by the market actors is 1 hour? I have to admit it's a very detailed question. We could also send that to you and you could do that in the written form, but there are technical questions related to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ehler. Señor González Casares, por favor.
Gracias, presidente. Gracias.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for coming here to explain your proposals. There was a big gap in Fit for 55, which was adapting the electricity market to the Green Deal. We can see positive aspects in the reform, particularly when it comes to long-term markets, giving more power to the consumer. That's excellent as well. But we don't see any instruments to reduce the price volatility which we've been experiencing. There have been a lot of promises made by the Commission which have been rather left behind. Why don't you include some of the lessons that we learned during the crisis, which were positive lessons? Urgency reinforcements, using 1221. I think that the time has come, and now we've got the chance to carry out a reform which will give consumers the benefits of moving to renewals and more investment, and give SMEs the chance to take part in a market as opposed to them constantly picking up the tab for volatility. So we're talking about reforming, not politicizing the market so that it's not Putin or some other speculators who, through gas prices, set the prices for companies and people, ordinary citizens living in their homes. What we have to do is protect people. That's the important thing.
Muchas gracias. Señora Solís Pérez. Por favor.
Gracias,
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for coming here today to present your reform. I also see very positive aspects. As far as the market is concerned, it's not an interventionist thing, which some member states were calling for, and also it could allow renewable energy to be sold to consumers at affordable prices. I've been struck, first of all, that there's no mention of interconnections at all in the electricity market reform, which are surely important if we're going to increase the amount of renewables and provide more market stability. They're not even mentioned in the text. So how are you going to encourage countries that are more reluctant to use them? Secondly, the idea of sharing renewables between consumers, there are initiatives there, but it seems they're going to be quite hard to apply. So I'm wondering whether in the Commission you believe having standardised contracts for renewal sharing would be the way forward, or having small interchange markets to get consumers used to them. Thirdly, in Spain, with photovoltaic energy, we've got low-cost electricity being generated. Do you think that's going to be enough in terms of demand management and stopping people speculating? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Weiss, please.
Thank you so much, Chair, and also thank you, Kadri, for being with us this afternoon, and being a Dane, but also somehow also related else to colleagues in this room. I might sound like a papagei, and I excuse for that, but it's very serious, the reason for that, and that relates to the forward markets and the virtual hubs. Because yes, there are studies that suggest that virtual hubs could be an idea, but in theory, the Nordic hub experience says the contrary. And I very much would like to underline the importance that you dig into the evidence and the stakeholders around the Nordic hub who can tell you that actually the liquidity in the Nordic hub decreased rapidly the past decade as a result. Therefore, Danes and other Nordic stakeholders are not very convinced that a mandatory introduction of virtual hubs is actually a very good way to go. So I would very much appreciate if you can elaborate a little bit on that. Are you actually aware about these examples from the Nordic hub? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Hahn, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I will speak on behalf of Marie Toussaint, who's still in the train. Thank you very much for being with us, dear Commissioner, today. And I would like to thank you for adding to the proposal for a revision of the directive a point on the prohibition of electricity cuts. And this is a major step forward, but the article we still have to see as weak in the text, and I therefore appeal to my colleagues to strengthen these parts of the text. And you know that 1 in 10 Europeans can't heat themselves properly in winter, and that 1 in 5 can't cool their homes in summer. And this issue is linked to an important right, tied to energy as a human right to an affordable, renewable amount of energy to live decently. And a consumer who is in default of payment and whose energy is cut off is not a bad payer. It's a vulnerable consumer who, before being cut off, has reduced his budget for food, leisure, or health when you listen to the people. And when we talk about ban cuts all year long, we have to consider if the suspensions of cuts in winter are indispensable, they hide the reality of the climatic disruption of heat waves in summer. And households also need light refrigerators and communication devices during the whole year. And when we talk about ban cuts for everybody and not just for vulnerable households, we have to consider that this definition varies from state to state, and the crisis has shown that the middle classes are also concerned by the risk of power cuts. When we talk about reverse the burden of proof, we have to consider not being able to pay your energy bill is a criterion of vulnerability. And when we systemize recourse to the judge, we have to consider it's up to the judge to assess the vulnerability of the household and its ability to repay, and it's not up to the operator to decide that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Fuchslang, our rapporteur for energy efficiency.
Thank you very much, and thank you to you, Commissioner. I would like us to remind ourselves that the crisis that we have seen in the electricity system was caused by a number of extraordinary factors. We have the Russian war on energy in Europe. We had the low availability of nuclear last year, and also the low availability of hydropower. And then we had the rising demand after the COVID crisis. So that was, of course, a stress on the whole energy system. And now we're making a reform. You're proposing some structural changes, and we should, of course, consider answering an extraordinary situation with a structural reform might cause some challenges. I think that a very important part of this reform should be to ensure that we boost the investments in renewables. And that is why I would like to ask you, how do you see that your reform will contribute to boosting investments, even more investments in renewables? And also, as Madame Carvalho said from the EPP, investments in grids. That is extremely important. We do not have enough connections between our countries in Europe right now to use all the renewables that we have. So how can your reform also contribute to increasing the level of grids in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I invite Mrs. Penkova.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Madam Commissioner, for being here with us today. I welcome what you said, actually, about the importance of the Net Zero Industry Act and the electricity market design to be connected together, because we need reliable and stable electricity system if we want to ensure that our industry works. At the moment, I think that too many people are looking at this reform of the electricity market as a miracle solution that will immediately reduce the energy prices overnight. We understand that this is unrealistic, and probably we're going to see the results of this reform next year. I just want to emphasize on the fact that we should not allow this file and this legislation to become too politicized in this House, because this will only slow down the process, and our citizens demand us to act quickly. I will emphasize on 4 important things we need to be looking at when we do this reform. First of all, better connectivity and new transmission lines. Second, more flexible management system that transform overproduction of energy to the regions that need it more. Third, faster permitting procedures for the renewable installations. And fourth, we have to make sure that the market design is simpler and the prices are more predictable. Can you just say if the new reform addresses those things, and can you assure us that the new changes would not make the electricity market more complicated and difficult to implement for our households and industry? Thank you.
Thank you so much. President Buzek, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner, for your proposal, and congratulations, even because it is rather limited in scope and precisely targeted. This is what we need, as a matter of fact. I've got a question on the REMIT regulation. Maybe slightly provocative, because if the provisions proposed now are to be implemented in full, would that help to avoid that energy crisis similar to the current one will not happen again? Because we would like to know what is the most important in your proposal to avoid similar crises in the future. If I may ask second question, also on behalf of colleague Jens Geier. We are both responsible as main rapporteurs for hydrogen package, and we would like to say that electricity market design, the main aim of this package is energy security, green energy, industrial competitiveness, absolutely the same like in the case of hydrogen package. So it is absolutely key not to postpone hydrogen package to favor the electricity market design only. And we see that presidency, as a matter of fact, is waiting on electricity package, not starting serious work and proposals on hydrogen. Could you help us in this problem? Because we would like to start immediately. We are ready 2 months in European Parliament.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Spiraki, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being with us. I'll try to be very brief, starting with the rights of consumer, because I think it is important to clarify how will work the so-called supplier for last resort, particularly when it comes to the appointment, and please clarify it. Also, on the issue of the contracts of difference and PPAs in different member states, how will this kind of implementation will proceed to further integrate the internal market in terms of electricity? And third, according to the Euroelectric, which is the Federation of the EU electricity industry, as we all know, the market after this reform needs decentralization and flexibility. Do you consider that this proposal addresses these 2 requirements? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Zorinho, please.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Commissioner, the new shape of the electricity market proposed by the Commission is a step in the right direction. It increases the amount of renewables, it provides more interconnections, and there's more on storage technology too. It provides support for the most vulnerable consumers. So, as I said, it's a step in the right direction. But it's a fairly hesitant step, and it doesn't go far enough. with the markets and the marginal market, it's difficult, I think, to justify what you're doing here. And it's got costs involved for the consumer. More transparency is needed when longer-term contracts are brought in, would allow us to, not immediately, but slowly wean ourselves off the use of marginals in gas pricing. Do you agree with that idea, even if it's progressive? Why is the Commission insisting on these marginal rules? When what's happened on the Iberian Peninsula shows the way that we have benefited from not necessarily using gas prices in terms of calculating costs. When you've got the Iberian mechanism, why haven't you decided to factor those ideas into your vision of the market? Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there are any other catch the eye requests, I don't see. So I'll give the floor to Commissioner Kadri Simson to answer to these questions, comments, and also if you want to have a final conclusion, of course, our debate and interaction on electricity market design is just at the beginning, as we'll start working, as I said, quickly, and we'll go fast.
Indeed, and once again, thank you for very detailed questions. And if some of them were too detailed, and I just don't have enough time to reply to all of them, we will address them and send the answers. And please be assured that if you need any technical help to prepare your position on these files and in the further process for dialogues, then my services and I personally, I am at your disposal. So this is a political priority for us that we can also conclude this electricity market design during an extremely short time span that is still at our disposal. President Buzek made a very good comment that this is not only about the electricity market design, but here is also one part addressed to REMIT. This is regulation on wholesale energy market integrity and transparency. And this is created to detect any possible manipulation in the internal electricity market. So this is this piece that requires market participants to provide information on all trades, and REMIT also obliges firms that are arranging transactions to report suspicious activity. And when suspicious activity is reported by a power exchange or market party or noticed by the ACER surveillance team, then national regulators can start investigations. So also very important part of our proposal, because market manipulations will not be detected very often, but there are sanctions in the forms of fines, and all in all, the EU has a robust framework in place. But in the electricity market design reform, we also make further improvements to REMIT in order to have sufficient measures in place given the increasing complexity of power markets. And there are several aspects that are not creating political headlines, but I do remember once again from 2017 when I was chairing council meetings that the dialogues and negotiations, they will be very technical, and co-legislators need all the technical information. We will provide this. Just to conclude, once again, how we will tackle this issue right now that gas remains in the near future this technology that is most frequently used to balance the electricity system. For example, to ensure that short-term supply and demand match at each moment in time. this is expected to be the case also with increasing renewable penetration unless alternative flexibility means such as demand response and storage are developed. And the reform will set the framework conditions for increased investments in flexibility alternatives to gas-fired power, such as storage and demand response. This includes incentivizing system operators to procure the relevant flexibility services, the so-called peak shaving products, requiring member states to assess the flexibility needs in their system and to set an indicative national objective for storage and demand response and include it also to their national energy and climate plans, and allowing member states to introduce targeted support for the rollout of storage and demand response. And to be clear, member states that have capacity mechanism in place can already provide this kind of support. But the proposal allows a simpler process, and member states without capacity mechanism can, of course, also use this opportunity. And this brings me to the case study that we have been able to follow in Nordic market. I myself, I am also consumer of this product, and I know how this actually empowers consumers. You know the price development and you can actively participate in this market. This is something that also allows system operators to opt for transmission rights longer than 1 year, so that if a forward contract is between parties across regions or borders, they can ensure transmission of electricity. And indeed, we were inspired what has happened in Nordic countries, in North Pool Spot region, where in some parts of the market, significant deficits for some hours were compensated by the trade from other producing member states. So this is not something that just seems to be working, but has been tested in real life. And on top of that, it has sent also a clear investment signals, so that larger share of electricity consumed in this region is produced by renewables. And of course, contracts for difference, they are only one option to give a clear investment signal, only in the case when state aid is needed. It doesn't abolish the state aid procedure. And all these new renewable installations that are coming to the market and do not need any state aid, they can opt for PPAs. This is a scheme that is existing right now, but not used sufficiently enough. And the questions what address the missing parts of this file, for example, how we will ensure that our markets will be sufficiently interconnected. This is our priority, to invest into the cross-border infrastructure. But there are other tools at our disposal, for example, Trans-European Network for LNG and our CEF calls. They are exactly designed for such a purpose, that member states can count on European funds and support for permitting for dedicated cross-border infrastructure, and we will prioritize electricity cables in this regard. Once again, thank you for another very interesting discussion and dialogue, and it is my pleasure to wrap up and allow Minister Galushenko to take the floor after me.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Simson. Thank you for being here with us. As you saw, The proposal is very much welcomed by most of the colleagues. Of course, there are some questions. Thank you for answering to these questions. Colleagues will propose also amendments, and the process of amending and then adopting this piece of legislation just starting, so we'll have the chance to discuss again. As you mentioned also, and I mentioned at the beginning of our meeting, and we are a little bit